Welcome to ILTV's Insider. I'm Mayan Hoffman. The United States last week rolled out a ceasefire and hostage exchange deal that it says Israel has agreed to. Now, the country is urging Doha to convince Hamas to sign the deal, which would in its first phase see the remaining living, female, elderly, and sick hostages abducted during the October 7th Hamas massacre returned to Israel. The deal has led some members of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's far-right coalition to threaten to bring down the government, despite Netanyahu's claim that the goals of the war have not changed. Let's hear what the Prime Minister has to say, followed by right-wing Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir.
אנחנו פועלים באין ספור דרכים כדי להחזיר את החטופים שלנו. אני חושב עליהם כל הזמן. אני חושב עליהם כל הזמן. על המשפחות שלהם, על הסבל שלהם. ולכן הלכנו כברת דרך ארוכה כדי להחזיר אותם. אבל תוך כדי הפעולה הזאת, אנחנו שמרנו על מטרות המלחמה. בראשן חיסול החמאס. אנחנו מתעקשים שאנחנו נשלים גם את זה וגם את זה.
אם אין הסכמה לסיום המלחמה, מדוע אתם מסרבים להראות לי את הטיוטה שהבטחת להראות לי? סיבה להסתרות, למריחות, לסחבת, יכולה להיות רק סיבה אחת. מדובר בטיוטה של עסקה מופקרת. וכעת יש איזשהו ניסיון לערוך לה הלבנה.
The deal comes on the heels of an announcement yesterday by the IDF that 4 more Israeli hostages have died in captivity. Only about 120 hostages remain in Gaza, many who have already been declared dead by Israeli authorities. Joining us now to talk about the proposed ceasefire deal and its implications on the hostages, the government, U.S.-Israel relations, and our own security is ex-Mossad official Rami Igra. Rami served as the head of the Mossad's Prisoners and Missing Persons Division. We also have with us journalist and analyst Eric Manzel. Eric is the founder of the Middle East Political and Information Network. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we have seen the basic outline of this 3-phase deal, and I want to start by asking both of you this. Knowing what you know, is this a good deal for Israel? Eric, why don't you start?
Well, what Israel decides is, as an American who talks about American national security interests, I can tell you what I think my country's perspectives are, which to my mind are coincident with Israel's about 95% of the time. However, it's up to Israel to decide upon a ceasefire deal. I believe this is not a good deal. I don't believe you can trust Hamas. And looking at the Middle East over decades, I believe that if a partial hostage deal is made, you may save those hostages, but I don't believe that hostages will be released in the future. They are going to remain as leverage for the future. What I would like my country to have said is that the American goal is Israel's goal to destroy Hamas, its infrastructure, if not its ideology. Demand that all the hostages at once are handed over. All the leaders and terrorists go to a terrorist sanctuary. If Hamas says no, I think my government should say that we unconditionally support Israel's desire to destroy Hamas as the best way to bring back the hostages. I know this is not what the Israeli people necessarily want to hear, and again, it's their decision to make. But I believe that's the best way to bring the hostages back. And I think my government should say that we know that Israel, and I just did some investigative reporting in the last couple of weeks, is doing everything it can to minimize the amount of civilian casualties that are there. Historically, Israel has killed 1.5 civilians to 1 terrorist, which is way beyond, although every civilian life is important, way beyond the 9 to 1 that the UN reports in most Middle East wars. And that the U.S., unfortunately, I think for political reasons, is pushing on Israel a deal that is bad, but there are worse choices.
Okay, so Eric, I'm going to stop you now just because I want to have a chance for Rami to also be able to respond, and I know we have a lot of questions to get through. So Rami, if you can tell me, what do you think of the deal? Do you agree with Eric? Is this a bad deal for Israel?
Well, I can get off the show because I completely agree with Eric. If you look at what Biden announced, Biden said, among other things, that at the end of the day, at the end of this deal, Hamas will still be sovereign in Gaza. Hamas will still be on the other side of the border. And the fantasy that he presented is that the people that are going to check Hamas and make it into a goody government instead of a jihadist movement is Qatar and Egypt. Now, Qatar and Hamas are the same. They're the same entity in many ways. They're both ultra-right or ultra-religious Muslim entities that at the end of the day look for one goal. And the goal is the destruction of Israel and the creation of an Islamic kingdom, so to say, in the land of Palestine. So the deal that has been proposed is a terrible deal for Israel, and I would like to elaborate a little bit about this. If we look at the past deals that Israel has made with the Palestinians, starting with the Jibril deal in 1985, going through the Mash'al deal and going through the Shalit deal not so long ago, in all of these deals, what Israel has done is strengthen the jihad. And when you strengthen the jihad, you can expect what we got at the end of the Jibril deal, which was the 2 intifadas, and what we got at the Shalit deal, which is the 7th of October. If we, God forbid, agree to this deal, and if we, God forbid, do this deal, on the one hand, we will save these 125 hostages and families that our hearts go to, on the one hand. On the other hand, we're putting 9 million Israeli civilians at risk. We're looking at a future religious war here, and we tend to forget in Israel the years that bombs exploded in the streets and coffee houses were a dangerous place to visit. So if you ask me, this deal is not the solution. I also don't agree with the argument that the only way to bring the Hamas to the table is military. The only way, in my mind, to bring Hamas to the table is changing the sovereignty in the Gaza Strip, is replacing Hamas with some kind of other Palestinian entity that will be the entity for the future. Today, if you look at the situation in Gaza, on the one hand of the street, you have Israeli tanks and military might. And on the other hand of the street, on the other end of the street, you have the Hamas police, and you have the Hamas supplying food, and you have the Hamas governing. And if we want to bring the Hamas into the negotiating table as a conquered entity, which it is, the only way to do it is to replace their sovereignty. The problem is Israeli politics.
So let me ask you this. It's intriguing, that after already 8 months of this conflict going on, much of the international community is actually advocating for this ceasefire. Biden seems to believe that Netanyahu is behind the agreement, and they are placing the onus on Israel to halt the fighting rather than on Hamas, which, as you said, instigated the conflict. The world seems to be kind of asking Hamas to please agree to the ceasefire, while simultaneously putting a lot of pressure on Israel to do the same. Hamas has not even forwarded us the list of the living hostages. Is this what is expected in hostage negotiations? Rami, you've done them. Does Israel now or ever have the upper hand?
Listen, the Israeli public and also the world are willing to, societies that are, we want to get peace now, quiet now, and we will pay in the future. This was the philosophy behind our dealing with Hamas in the past. This is the philosophy behind our dealing with Hezbollah. Nobody wants the conflict now. Everybody wants quiet now. Let us enjoy our lives. And in the future, we will pay whatever the credit card asks us. And this is why you have a growing support for this deal, and for the people want to go back to their lives. People want to end this war and go back to their lives. They do not understand, and this is the government's job to declare, which they don't do because they too have political straits. They want to go back to their lives. The government should tell them, listen, will go back to the light today, and we will pay for it in the future, as we are doing now with the Hezbollah. Look what happened with the Hezbollah. We left Lebanon, and at the end of the day, after leaving Lebanon and leaving the strife that was in Lebanon, we have earned hundreds of thousands of missiles on the other end of the border.
And a very, very big fire that is blazing across the north just today and yesterday, as you mentioned.
Yeah, and we have to face now the Hezbollah. At the end of the day, we have no choice. Yeah. And instead of facing the Hezbollah over the last 20 years, day by day in Lebanon, we will now have to go into a major war to end the Hezbollah's threat to Israel.
So let me turn to Eric for a minute, Rami, because with that, I think it's actually very important what you're saying. And, you are saying for us here in Israel, we need to be able to not have the ceasefire deal now, that it will only hurt us in the long term. But if Israel does not accept the ceasefire deal, Eric, what do you believe will be the impact on U.S.-Israel relations and on U.S. support for this war?
Well, as long as the Biden administration is there, if Israel is perceived to be the obstacle to a ceasefire, Israel is going to pay a price. And any daylight between the United States and Israel, certainly during these times, will be perceived as weakness on Israel, and Israel's adversaries will take advantage. They always fill those vacuums. So, you were listening to the ceasefire deal, which President Biden inexplicably made after the Shabbat had begun, and Bibi responded, no matter what anybody thinks of Bibi, on a Shabbat to say that's not exactly what we agreed to. And the whole idea of putting Hamas and Israel, a terrorist entity, and Israel's most important ally in the region, sort of on equal grounds, is kind of perverse to start. But the U.S.-Israel relations are going to be troubled. Remember, President Biden will be there to 2025, January 20th, no matter who wins the election. So I think these are troubled times, and I think Netanyahu is going to have to make a decision between maybe what he thinks is best for Israel, dealing with his far-right coalition, and what the Israeli people are demanding, because the hostage situation is so subjective as opposed to looking at the situation objectively, as I think Rami and I are looking at it.
So now I want to jump back to something that you touched on before, but I think is important to elaborate on. Let's say we do sign this deal. Does Hamas continue to rule Gaza? What does it look like then the day after? Eric, take a couple minutes, and then Rami, also you, if you don't mind.
So I just spent some time with the new Panther Battalion in the West Bank. And Tulkarem and Qalqilia, Tulkarem is all Hamas. Qalqilia is now half Hamas. What Israel is going to need to do, and this is what my government needs to say, is that Gaza is going to need to be like the West Bank. Israel is going to have to go in every single day and extract terrorists. Mortars are going to still come out. And my government can't be saying that we are not going to support Israel. So what Israel is going to need to do, it has a model. It's what the West Bank is long term, unless the generations of incitement and scapegoating and hatred of Israel and Israel's right to exist as a Jewish nation are totally an anathema to the Palestinian people overwhelmingly, who overwhelmingly still support October 7th, then we have to get out of the Western mindset of we want things now. We have to think about the Middle East as it is, and that means there are generations before a Palestinian state is ready, certainly in Gaza and certainly in the West Bank.
Rami, take that question as well. Do you agree with Eric?
Day after, as you've said, the day after Hamas continues its rule in the Gaza Strip, Israel will be faced with a jihad war on all its borders, and it's not going to be only in its borders. We are going to go back to the dark days of the first and second intifadas, and the Jewish people in Israel will face the price of peace now, hostages now. But I want to suggest some other thing, and there is a way out of this. If Netanyahu, and Netanyahu is not able to do that because of his right-wing base and coalition, if Netanyahu uttered the two words, Palestinian state, forget what kind of Palestinian state, he could change the game altogether. He could change the game in the negotiations with the Hamas, and he could change the game in the world and in the United States. But Netanyahu, being a very clever man, is the biggest hostage in this situation. Wow. More than any other hostage, Netanyahu is the hostage. He is hostage to his own party, and he is hostage to his own coalition, and he's hostage to his own will to continue power at the prime minister's office. If he would only change a bit, history is going to turn around.
So let's talk about that. You know, Palestinian state, as you mentioned, that's an interesting idea. I think we should discuss it more. But also an Israeli state, we're seeing an issue with shrinking borders. You mentioned the fires raging in the north, right, after attacks by Hezbollah. Much of the north and the south, the people who live there have not returned to their homes. One of the greatest successes by Iran during the war was to tie Gaza to the, and the Gaza front to Hezbollah and the northern front. Eric and Rami, can Israel survive, forget thrive, just survive without the periphery? Eric, why don't you start?
No, Israel should.
Rami. Go ahead, Rami, you go for it. Go for it, and then Eric, take it after.
Okay. As I said before, Israel had no other option and has to confront Hezbollah. There is no way out of it. Israel has to go into war or into a mini war in the northern front and return all our civilians to the north of Israel. There is no other way. And Netanyahu, being what Netanyahu is, he is worried about this possibility and he doesn't want to do it. And because he doesn't do it, you're looking at really the partition plan of 1948. Israel has shrunk because of these considerations. But I don't think there will be any choice. At the end of the day, not only the Israeli public, but also the needs of the population. Israel will have to attack Lebanon, and the Lebanese, I think, understand this. And Hezbollah, that thinks that Israel can't confront it, are wrong. Israel has gone to war with much bigger armies than the Hezbollah. And I think the Hezbollah is going to be very surprised, just the way that the Iranians were very surprised the day they shot at Israel 300 or 400 missiles to no avail.
So, Eric, let me ask you the same question. Are we going to war with Hezbollah? Is that what has actually been following this a long time? Is that the next step?
Yeah, it's not if, it's only when. No nation can be a nation if you have to have the buffer side on your side of the border. Just one thing I wanted to say is tactically, Hezbollah can do what it wants. But on a strategic level, as far as starting a major war, that is still up to Iran by Walid al-Faqih, guardianship of the jurist. That means that Hezbollah will follow exactly what the supreme leader wants. I've been in 4 different times with battalions on the northern border in the last 8 months in Har Dov, in the Western Galilee, in Margaliot, in Kibbutz Rosh Hanikra. There's a real war going on. I think people, because of what's going on in Gaza, are not understanding it. In my talks with the Israeli government, they have agreed to only a 10-kilometer withdrawal, which is just outside of the anti-tank Cornet missile range. That's not enough. You need United Nations Security Council Resolution 1701 to be implemented 30 kilometers north to the Litani River. But interestingly enough, I think this is going to be a harder situation than Gaza. In Gaza, I think you have a template of what's done in the West Bank to go in and every night and take care of it. But when Israel goes in and it can defeat, and I agree with Rami, Hezbollah, and it will be a hard price with the over 200,000 missiles and drones and all UAVs that it has, who is it going to hand it over to? The Lebanese Armed Forces? No. The United Nations, UNIFIL, has allowed in 150,000 missiles. So will Israel be back to 1982 to 2000 and have to control that area again? I don't see Arab countries coming in there. And again, just taking one step back, you see the Shiites of Hezbollah and the Sunnis of Hamas working together. My enemy's enemy is my friend. And Israel has to come out as the victor and be perceived strong for deterrence and eventually the normalization my administration wants in this region.
So I want to go back to the hostages. These poor people, these poor families have been struggling for nearly 8 months. Rami, if you were still in your role, what would you do right now? What would you do differently?
there is nothing that you can really do. Israel has made a long list of mistakes in dealing with these with the hostages. The first thing is the families have built in Israel a huge movement, pro-families. And I mean, whatever their protest works against them. Hamas is using the rift in the Israeli society against Israel. They are looking with satisfaction at what is happening between the people that are pro-hostages and the people that are anti-hostages, and the hostages are just raising the price and really persuading the Hamas that they have a strategic asset in their hand, and they have to wait and use this asset in order to win the war. Look at what's happening. At the end of the day, Israel is winning militarily the war. There is not much of the Hamas's military might existing. It's all have been destroyed. And on the other hand, the Hamas come to the negotiation table as a victor because it is holding these assets. The Israeli public has not been told by the government, and this is one of the mistakes, that there is a red line here. The welfare of 9 million citizens here is just as important as the welfare. Now, I want to give you an example.
No, but Rami, we're actually 1 minute till the end of the show, so I'm not going to be able to take that example today. But I think that we got the message, which is that 9 million Israelis are at risk if we sign this deal. And I think we understand. I want to give you guys each exactly 10 seconds to answer this question. The last question is this: is Israel winning the war? Yes or no? Eric, yes or no? Rami, yes or no? Let's end with that.
Again, yes. I agree with tactically, Israel's winning the war. Strategically, that is an open question that will be answered over the next 6 months and way beyond. So I think for American interest, Israel has to win this war.
Rami?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is winning the war, and I agree it is militarily and tactically winning the war. Strategically, we're on our way. That we have all the possibilities to do so, but you know, stupidity wins sometimes.
Well, thank you both so much for being here. That's all the time that we have this evening. Thank you to our guests, ex-Mossad official Rami Igra and journalist and analyst Eric Menzel. For more of the latest updates from Israel, make sure to subscribe to our newsletter at ILTV.tv. Thanks for watching. Let's win this war and bring them home.